I'm having some real difficulty sleeping tonight. I've been reading some scary stories, and that probably doesn't help. I read one that reminded me of an experience that I had the last time I had trouble sleeping. I figured I'd share it with you. I went back home this summer. I'm writing this in September, by the way. My hometown is really far away from where I currently live. During the journey home, I fell asleep on the Shinkansen, the bullet train. I only wanted to sleep for about an hour, but I slept for about 4, I think. I got home, greeted my parents, and after I had dinner with my parents and they went up to bed, I found myself unable to sleep. I was so restless, and I knew that the next morning we were all going to go on an important trip. I figured that the best thing I could do would be to take a walk. I hoped that the night air would help me feel sleepy. I went to the local convenience store. I got there just after 1 a.m. I went in and wandered over to the magazine rack in the corner. I was looking at the adult entertainment thinking that might help me get to sleep. It was at that point that I sensed something. I felt that horrible feeling you get when you just know that someone is watching you. I looked up to see an old man staring at me through the window of the convenience store. I thought, whoa, this is kind of awkward. There I was looking at this specialist gentleman's material, and unbeknownst to me, I was being watched. I felt that it would be even more awkward if I looked directly up at the guy and met his eyes. I did, however, take a quick, covert look while pretending to browse. I remember he had a dirty white t-shirt on, and he was overweight. It didn't look like he had washed for a while. He looked all disheveled. It was obvious that he was staring at me, and it wasn't something I was willing to stand any longer. I moved away and into another aisle. I was looking at the drinks. I picked a relaxing tea and went to the register. The clerk behind the till fixed me with a look between nervousness and the awkward. And then I said, "Hey, that guy out there, he looks a little off, right? He was just staring at me a minute ago." Yes, actually, I noticed that," he replied. "You the only one working here tonight?" I asked. Yeah, that's right." I noticed that he was pretty young. He looked scared too. I think that he must have been between 18 to 20 years old. I wasn't much older than him, by the way. I was only 24. So I said to him, "Hey, I don't like the look of the guy out there. Do you mind if I hang out in here? I'll pretend to browse, and hopefully after a while he'll go away." He looked at me like he had just been given a birthday present and said, "Yes, thank you." I guess he was just as creeped out as I was by that guy. I think I was in there browsing and chatting with the clerk for about half an hour to an hour. It started to get a little lighter out, all the while we were hiding out in the store from that weirdo. He remained out there staring in at us. At times it looked like he was deep in contemplation. At other times it looked like there wasn't a single thought in his mind. Something was wrong. A truck pulled into the convenience store's parking lot, and as soon as it did, we saw that weird guy saunter off someplace. The truck driver came in. He looked over at us and said, "Did you see that guy out there? He's out there with a goddamn knife behind his back." I was shocked and scared, to be honest. So scared that I called a taxi because I didn't want to walk home. And the clerk called the cops. I didn't realize how close I was to a situation potentially life-threatening. Stay safe out there, everyone, and always trust your intuition. I bought a house in the suburbs a few years ago, and since I lived pretty close to the train station, I decided that I would use the train to commute to work. This was about 5 years ago, I guess. I had just had my son. These days I drive, and I have to put up with traffic, but there's a very good reason why I drive now. And I'll tell you. On the night this happened, I had been out with some co-workers after work. This kind of thing was standard in our company. We would usually get together, have a drink, like once a month. It was a late night. I knew it was going to be a late one. It always was. I wanted to make it home before the last train. My wife was at home with my son, and I didn't want her to be up late worrying about me. I think I caught the second or third from last train of the night back home. When I got on the train, I noticed it was almost empty, and that was really great. I had enough space to relax. I got a little too relaxed, and I fell asleep actually. I was pretty low on sleep. It was about a 50-minute train ride home, so I thought I might as well catch up on some lost sleep. But I didn't need to change trains either. I woke up now and then to see people exiting the train. In the daytime, you could see these huge high-rise apartment blocks from the train windows, so I guess these people were commuters like me. I knew from the station that I was in that I wouldn't be home for another 20 minutes or so I decided against shutting my eyes again. In order not to fall asleep, I stood up and faced the window. I figured that looking at something was probably better than being comfortable in my seat. I wanted the distraction. I watched shapes of buildings pass by under the cover of darkness. I tried to imagine where I was based on the shapes of those buildings. At the next stop, the last couple of people got off, leaving me completely alone. It was kind of unusual to be alone in a train at night. If you've ever seen the trains in Tokyo, you'll understand. They are always super crowded. I enjoyed the rarity of my situation. I was thinking strange things. The buzz I had from the beers earlier was wearing off and tiredness was in full effect. There might have been others on the train, but I'm specifically talking about my carriage. The most popular carriages were at the front because they were closest to the stairs when you got off. I always took about the third or second carriage when I rode the train, but anyway, that's not really important. I was about one station away from home. Between the next station and the station I get off at, there's a tunnel. This tunnel runs right through a mountain and plunges the train into darkness for about 3 minutes or so. When the train went into that tunnel, I used the opportunity to look at myself in the window. Due to the darkness, it acted like a kind of mirror, and I used that mirror to adjust my hair and try to make myself look more presentable for when I would go home and face my wife. What the hell? I heard myself mutter. Reflected in the dark window was a man sat opposite me. He was an old man who looked to be in his 50s. He looked like a hiker. I thought that I was completely alone in that carriage, so I freaked out for a moment. But due to how tired or buzzed I was, did I completely miss this guy? I asked myself. I decided that I did, and I told myself not to worry too much about it. I made a mental note to check my surroundings more thoroughly next time. I tried not to stare as well. I felt as if I couldn't help it though. The guy was staring into the window directly at me. He did not grin. He did not look away. He was fixated on me. The look that he was giving me wasn't a friendly one. I would describe it as expressionless. It was chilling. I didn't like it. I didn't want to turn around and face him. I decided not to be confrontational, for the sake of my wife and my newborn. I would take out my phone and ignore that weirdo's stare. As I pulled my phone out of my pocket, I managed to pull my house keys out with it. They fell to the floor. I stooped to pick up the keys, and the next couple of things happened in what felt like a split second. I looked into the window to keep an eye on this guy as I bent down to get the keys. He shot to his feet and emerged about 30 or 50 centimeters behind me. He was holding something in his hand and raising it above his head. It was a small axe, like a handy mountaineering ice pick axe kind of thing. I screamed. I was completely defenseless. I just kind of dived forward, keeping low towards the door to the next carriage. I had a plan in mind to get as close to the driver as possible. As I put my hand on the door that connects to the next carriage, I took the opportunity to look again to see what was happening behind me. It was instinctive. I imagined to see that guy racing right up behind me, but I couldn't see him anymore. He wasn't there. I don't know if he dropped down low to hide or attack in a different manner, or if he was ever there, but I couldn't see him anymore, and that terrified me. I ran right to the front of the train and waited a few terrifying moments, no more than 30 seconds in all actuality, for the train came to a stop at my station. The train pulled in and I shot off of it. A young couple and an office worker stared right at me as they boarded. I was in a complete state. I wanted to run for it, but as I turned to go, I thought about those people who would be getting on the train. Was that man I saw in the reflection of the glass still on board? I made some garbled plea with them not to get on the train, but they ignored me. The train started moving down the tracks and I walked and then ran to keep pace with it. I wanted to catch the attention of those people who boarded. I made some gestures with my arms while shouting at them. I told them not to go into the next carriage as best as I could given the circumstances. I told the station staff, and they threatened to call the police if I didn't stop making a scene. I had just had a close call. I couldn't calm down, I'll have to admit that, but I felt as if they needed to know. I just hope that somebody listened. I hope that whatever I saw was nothing more than the conjuration of a tired mind as well. But something in me doesn't believe that, though. I think that was real. I never commuted to work again. I will never ride through that tunnel again. There are some expenses and inconveniences worth suffering, I guess. Back when I was in junior high school, I was taken on a class trip into the mountains. It was called a mountaineering camp. There were about 30 of us in total, boys and girls, and teachers. We were all riding the bus to the campsite, but we got delayed due to an accident on the roads. That meant that we would be getting there later than expected, but still light out when we arrived. We got off the bus, and with our class teacher at the helm, we headed into the woods, up towards the mountain campsite. The road to the campsite was very well signposted, and the direction was pretty much linear, so even the dumbest of us couldn't get lost or stray from the trail. Confident in that fact, I followed on at the back of the group. Everyone knows the cool kids go at the back, right? At some point my legs got tired or I got bored of walking, so I thought that I would take a quick break. I guessed that I would be fine, because I could be pretty quick when I wanted to be. I mean, I could still see my classmates' backs going up the mountain ahead. I waited until they were just in sight, and the second I couldn't see them, I rose to my feet and started climbing. I think that I left it a little too late though, because I wasn't as quick as I thought I would be. The trail was tough. I couldn't catch up to them. I was getting nervous. I tried to go as fast as I could to catch them, but no matter what I did, I couldn't see anyone's backs anymore. It was getting darker and darker too. Before I knew it, it got so dark that I couldn't even see my surroundings clearly anymore. I wasn't nervous now. I was on the verge of panic. I did what I thought would be best, and I started calling out the names of my closest friends. I couldn't make out what was up or down anymore. I had tears in my eyes. I was so scared of being lost in the woods, and so angry at myself for not keeping up with my classmates. I had to keep walking though. I thought that if I kept going, I was sure I would catch up to everyone, and everything would be fine. After a while, I thought that I saw a flicker of yellow in the darkness ahead of me. We were given these yellow ponchos for the trip. They were like raincoats, and we were to wear them if it began to rain. I had been so distracted by being frightened that I hadn't noticed that it had started to rain. I called out thinking that it was one of my classmates, but I guess they couldn't hear me because they didn't stop. I tried to up the pace, but I couldn't go much faster than I was already going. I closed the gap between me and one of my classmates. They were only about 20 meters or so ahead. I was calling out to them, but they still couldn't hear me. I couldn't catch them up. Knowing that they weren't going to stop, and I wasn't going to stop them, I paused to catch my breath again. I put on my yellow poncho, and I stayed where I was. The more I stood there waiting, the more I came to realize that there was no way that my classmate wouldn't have heard me. I stood there in the pitch black darkness, completely lost and terrified. I don't know how long I was there for, but it felt like hours. When it all looked its darkest, literally, I saw a light flickering between the trees. 3 people were approaching, and one was the teacher. I didn't think I could cry anymore at that point, but when I saw them, I started wailing. The place they found me at was about an hour's walk up the mountain from the campsite. I had somehow passed the campsite. It was the weirdest thing. Everyone was so relieved to see me, but above all, I was the most relieved to be found. There was one thing that was left unresolved, though. The classmate I thought I saw. I felt as if I was being led somewhere at one point. Whatever I was following clearly wasn't one of my classmates. All those missing person cases that happened out there in the wild and those theories about some mountain ranges in the USA, to me, that all could be real. There could be something out there. This happened when I was 19. It was when I went back to my hometown to visit my parents. My parents live in the city, and it can be a bit of a pain in the ass to park at home sometimes. I often end up parking halfway down the street and walking. On the night this experience took place, I parked down the street and a little around the corner. I visited them, had dinner, caught up, and then I said my goodbyes at around 10 p.m., probably a little closer to 10:30. So to get back to my car, I had to head down a street and through an alley. My car was parked just at the end of that alley. I got through the alley fine and back to my car. As I was about to get in my car, I noticed something in the alley. It wasn't dark enough for it to be pitch black out. Plus, it was summer, so there was still some faint natural light out, even at that time of night. I saw something in the alley which looked to be the shape of a human, and it was heading down the alley towards me and my car. It was almost swaying. It was the strangest thing. Quite eerie, actually. It was twisting and wiggling. It didn't look normal at all. I thought that it was trouble, some kind of weirdo or someone trying to distract me from something. I decided to get in the car quickly and get the hell out. That figure made me feel really uncomfortable. It's so hard to explain, so I just feel like asking a question at this point. Can humans look distorted? It's like he or she was glitching out, like it was a few frames behind real time, real life, or reality. It sort of jiggered, left to right. It was hard to make out because it was dark, but as soon as my eyes noticed that thing in the alley, it was pretty much unmissable. I strained my eyes and I saw it. I saw that thing so clearly. I wish I got out of there sooner than I did. But I was almost hypnotized by that thing. When it reached the end of the alley, it was showered in the light of 2 streetlights. Only then, when it was fully illuminated, was I able to see that thing and what it was. And to be honest, I still have no clue what I saw that night. I'll just try my best to explain it. It was completely pink, like a skin tone. It was like looking at meat. That's all I can really describe it as. It was just some amalgamation of meat crudely shaped as a human. I tell you, when I saw that thing, my spine ran ice cold. It was completely unexplainable. I was overcome with anxiety after seeing it. Even though I could have just as easily gone back to my parents' house, I decided to drive all the way home. It was like I was repelled. I needed to be so far away from it. I knew that just looking at that thing wasn't good. It was innate, like some kind of primal voice inside me told me to just get out of there, and fast. Something inside me told me that if I went back to my parents' house and that thing would follow me and get in somehow. I know I sound completely crazy, but that's just how I felt. I had to get far away, so I did. When I drove off, I looked in my rear-view mirror and noticed that the thing from the alley wasn't pursuing me. It didn't make me feel any less terrified, though. A few weeks later, I decided to pay my parents another visit. I guess that's because I couldn't get the incident in the alley off of my mind. It was still fresh. I decided to mention my experience to my mother, and I was surprised by her response. "Oh, you saw that down by the alley, right?" I said, yeah, that's where I saw it, and I mentioned the person's house I saw it near. You know what, that makes sense, I guess. You've been away for a while, so you haven't heard. The son of the Ishikawa family got hit by a car, and he passed away. It was a head-on collision, hit and run. Sorry to put it in a bad way like this, but maybe that was what you saw. Some kind of manifestation of that poor guy's final moments. I was shocked, but I guess it kind of made sense. My mum has always said to me that she can see things. And whatever she can see, I guess maybe I got something like that from her. We often talk about what we have seen. I don't know if my mother's theory is correct though, but it's the only thing I got. I'll never forget that night. I want to tell you about the most mysterious event that has ever happened in my life to date. What happened to us that day was an experience that I can never forget. This experience might not seem all that frightening to some, but to me it's horrible. 3 years ago during summer, I went camping with some friends. We have me, my friend, we will call A, his girlfriend, who we will call Y, and her friend, we will call M. It happened in the mountains of the Chubu region. It was somewhere where my friend A had been before. I was excited to go on a trip with my friends, and the location was supposed to be a little hidden spot off of the beaten track. We departed Osaka and traveled through Kyoto until we got on the national highway. The day we departed was the 10th of August. We were scheduled to camp out in the mountains for 2 nights and head back on the 12th. After getting off of the highway, we entered a few twisty country roads, and then we finally got on the right road. It was incredibly foggy around the mountains that day. I could barely see the road ahead of me. I managed to find a decent enough place to park just off of the side of the road. We then would have to walk for about 40 minutes, according to my friend, with all our camping gear to reach the campsite. But since the visibility outside was so poor, we made a decision to wait for it to clear a little. I mean, it was the mountains. One wrong step and you could be in danger. We killed time in the car by playing some tunes and chatting for a while. The fog wasn't lifting though, and everybody was getting restless, so we decided to head out. We headed into the mountains, through a thick blanket of fog. The order we walked in was as follows. A, my friend who had been there before, Y, his girlfriend, M, her friend, and me, bringing up the rear. We walked for about 30 minutes and we agreed it was time to take a break. We found a rocky outcrop to settle down on, and A walked over to me and whispered in my ear, "I think I took a wrong turn." We kind of joked around, and we weren't that upset by it. "I'm sure we should be by a river about now, but it feels like we're still around the base of the mountain, you know? There should have been a fork in the trail. We should have seen that by now." I replied, "I know we've been walking for about 30 minutes, but aren't we going a little bit slower than usual due to all this gear and, the fog, don't you agree?" He looked pretty satisfied with my explanation, and the glimpse of worry I saw in his eyes disappeared. We decided to push on and not turn back to the car. We walked for another 30 minutes, and then we finally reached the riverside, and thankfully by the time we got there, the fog had begun to clear. I looked around and saw everyone's relieved faces amidst the grey of the fog. We got closer to the riverside and found a nice little spot and begun to pitch our tents. Now that the fog had lifted, I could see that the place my friend took us to was actually a really beautiful place. We spent 2 nights there, having a great time. We brought more than enough supplies. It honestly felt like we were the only people there. True bliss. The day we had to leave was fine. It was a really grey kind of morning. The clouds were out and the morning mist quickly began to look like it was going to rain. We hurriedly packed up our things. We hurriedly packed up our stuff in an attempt to not get soaked before we got to the car. The mist was horribly thick. It was more like fog. We walked back for over an hour. I could tell by the stilted conversation that we had had just about enough of being out in the elements. We got back to the car and we got going. I quickly got us back on the highway, back on track. I reached one of the first of many toll gates. There are tons over here, by the way. And on the receipt, I noticed that something was a little off. The date displayed on the receipt read the 11th of August. I was the one driving, and I think I was the only one who noticed it. You know, those toll roads operate on the driver's side. I guess that there was some kind of malfunction with the machine because we set off on the 10th, and we spent 2 nights by the riverside. I put it to the back of my mind. We got further down the highway and my friend's girlfriend, Y, called home. I overheard the conversation she was having and it sounded like it quickly turned into a kind of argument. I guess that she was speaking with one of her parents. There was a bit of an atmosphere in the car after her call had ended. Someone then asked, "What was that about?" She replied with something like the following. "I was so weird. He said that he was surprised that I was coming back home a day early, and I was like, what?" I guess that we all heard the conversation with her dad. And yeah, it was pretty weird. We had a bit of a laugh though, and someone said, "It's not a day early. What? Look at the date on your phone." So we all got our phones out and looked. Why the hell not? My phone said the 12th. My friend's girlfriend's phone, Y, said the 12th. Her friend M's phone said the 12th of August. However, when my friend A checked, his phone said it was the 11th of August. The mood inside the car shifted. Everyone seemed pretty uneasy, and we kept asking each other what was going on. I remembered the slip I got from the toll booth and I showed everyone in the car, and we decided we needed to confirm the date, so we were going to pull over at the next gas station. I walked into the store they had there and asked the clerk, "Hey buddy, what's the date today?" "It's the 11th, he replied with a smile. I was shocked. I took a quick glance at the newspapers in the store, and they all said it was the 11th of August as well. I got my phone out and started making calls. I asked my brother, one of my friends, my mum, and everyone said that it was the 11th of August. I couldn't believe it. We left on the 10th, and after 2 full days. It was the 11th, but it couldn't be possible. The girls then started crying. I remember something suddenly, the reason why A's phone was showing the 12th and ours wasn't. He was complaining about having no signal or no battery or something, so he said he would leave his phone in my car. Something happened when we entered the fog. It was like time stood still for a day in there. We all believe that it was something to do with the fog. As a result, we got 1 extra day of holiday and life. So we should count ourselves lucky, I guess. I mentioned it to some people, but I felt like they either didn't believe me or tried to convince me that I had been mistaken. I thought that I'd just share my story here. If it's not that creepy to you, sorry, but it's scary as hell to me. This happened when I was in my 3rd year of junior high school. We had some entrance exams coming up at school, and my parents expected me to get the best grades possible, so I was enrolled into a cram school. A cram school is basically just school after school. You go to a specific class to focus on specific topics. It's pretty dull, and it makes the day feel super long. So after school finishes, I make my way to cram school, and we lived in a really rural area, so the cram schools weren't exactly close to my school. In order to get there, I had to go through this long, dark tunnel that was pretty creepy, even in summer. But I lived in an elevated area, a little ways up in the mountains, so tunnels were fairly common. My parents said that when they were my age, they got themselves to their lessons and back, and expected me to do the same. So from a young age, I was pretty active because of this. My friends at school said that the tunnel was an active spot for ghosts, and like I said, the tunnel was creepy, but it wasn't as if I was scared of anything paranormal. I didn't really believe in ghosts, but that all changed on the day that this experience took place. That day I headed to my cram school lesson as normal. After my regular classes, I entered the tunnel. It was pretty long, and it was always dark in there, even during the day. That day though, I felt a chill at my back, despite there being no breeze. I thought that I might be catching a cold or something, so I didn't pay it much mind. I just tried to hurry to get myself a little warmer. Something caught my eye. I said it was dark in the tunnel, but it wasn't exactly pitch black. That's how I noticed something lying on the floor. There were 2 objects, and they were bright red. There in the tunnel was a bright red pair of shoes. They were high heel ones as well, and I was a little girl at the time, growing into a teen. I was instantly drawn to them. I would have stopped and looked at them, maybe even picked them up if I had the time, but my volleyball practice had overrun at school, making me late for my cram school lesson. While I was at cram school, I couldn't focus on my lesson because I couldn't get those shoes out of my head. I mean, why were they there? Did someone walk into the tunnel wearing them and then, I don't know, something happened and they just left without their shoes? Was someone tired of wearing them and just ditched them? I didn't know why they were so alluring to me. I didn't walk back through the tunnel because my mother came to pick me up. This was usual, and that was fine because I didn't like the idea of walking home through that tunnel in the dark, and it got dark in winter pretty early in my town. The following day was a Saturday, and I was out playing with a friend. I asked her if she wanted to come with me to the tunnel to see if those beautiful shoes were still there. She wouldn't go though. She was too scared to go into that tunnel, even though it was a really bright day. So later, I decided to go by myself, but I couldn't find the shoes. I didn't exactly look hard though, because once again I was running late. Are you noticing a theme with my sense of timekeeping? I guess that the owner of those shoes might have come back and picked them up, or someone else could have swiped them. It was a bummer, but I made a mental note to double check on Monday on my way to my lessons. Monday rolled around, and after school I was approaching the tunnel once again. Just before the tunnel, there was a bend in the road. There was a guardrail hugging the border of the road. Just there, I saw something go over the edge. Something big. It was so weird though, because it was like a shadow. A shadow just fell off the edge. Like I said, we lived up in the mountains. If something goes off the edge, then it's really bad news. Definitely fatal, as it is a long, long way down to the jagged rocks below. Not really understanding what I saw, and potentially being too young to process it, I just ran into the tunnel. I wanted to get to the adults at my lesson to tell them about it. And as I was rushing through the tunnel, something caught my eye. There were 2 red objects, neatly sat side by side on the ground ahead. The red shoes were back. I couldn't help but gasp, or scream, I can't remember exactly. I stood there stunned, staring at them. And then I looked up a little, and I saw something, which made me feel as if my little heart stopped. There was a woman stood there in the tunnel, only she didn't look real. She looked like she was a memory, and I can't explain that in any other way than what I just said. She wasn't there, but she was there. She looked to be about 40 years old. She stood there glaring at me, and she had the saddest looking expression on her face. She looked so lonely and so desolate. I was so shocked and scared by what I saw that I couldn't even scream. I just ran right out of the tunnel. I looked behind me once. The woman wasn't following me. She just stood there, glaring at me with those sunken eyes and her hunched, defeated posture. I ran into a convenience store, and I must have been crying and sobbing because I caused such a fuss when I got there. They called my parents after I gave them my number, and I didn't go to cram school that day. I have never been so terrified in all my life. In fact, I never walked through that tunnel again to my lessons. I was shown a different route. I think when I was about 18 or 19, my mum told me that there had been more than a few individuals that had chosen to end things at that bend in the road. I'm not sure. Maybe because it's so secluded there, and the tunnel provides a great place to contemplate things. I'm guessing that's why I saw the shoes there. I wonder if anyone else has had a similar experience to mine. I mean, I hope that they haven't, because it was horrible, but I do wonder. Hi, Jay here. You may be wondering why someone would remove their shoes before ending things on their own terms. This seems to be somewhat of a common trait in Japan, and I found the following few points from an article on the Japan Times website, which I will link in the description. Possible theories as to why someone may remove their shoes before ending things, as not to carry dirt from this world into the next, to indicate that the death was in fact on their terms and not some kind of accident or at the hands of another, to increase the chances of their body being found. In the past, samurai have been known to do things like that too, and because it's been popularized in TV and dramas, the image of a pair of shoes on a cliff or on a roof on a building is something that's prevalent. It's better to remove one's shoes than have them come off during the fall and land in some embarrassingly untidy way, apparently. And finally, because they don't want their soul to stay grounded on Earth. I live in a pretty small town, and I have a pretty quiet life, in all honesty. I have an office job, and I work some pretty long hours, so I don't really go out all that much at night. On the night that this experience took place, I got a call from a friend of mine. To be honest, I almost didn't pick it up, but I'm really glad that I did. She had called to say that she needed a ride. I didn't mind. I didn't have any plans. She needed to be picked up from a big supermarket. I guess that she had bought a ton of things, and she didn't want to take all of that on the crowded train home with her. I was happy to help, but it seemed a little late to be shopping. It was around 11 p.m. when she called. I needed a couple of things too, so I headed into the store to meet her. The supermarket was almost empty at that time of night, but it is usually really busy during the day. We got our things, paid, and headed back to the parking lot. I think that it was about midnight at that point. A group of men came out. of a nearby game center. It's like an arcade. I think these guys came out because the place was about to close. They headed to their cars while talking to each other and looking over at us. My friend said to me that she wasn't feeling well, and we decided to get going. We pulled out of the parking lot, and a couple of the other cars followed on behind us. That was normal though. It was closing time, and the lights in the retail park were all going out. I noticed that my friend was quiet. I guess that was just because she said she didn't feel well. I looked over at her, and she looked pale. She looked at me and said, "I think I know the guy in the car behind us." I didn't think much of it when she said that. I thought that it was just some coincidence. I went to look in the mirrors to see if I knew him too, and then my friend suddenly said, "Don't look back." I realized why she was so uncomfortable now, and I tried to pull over to let the guy pass, but then my friend snapped at me. She said, "Don't stop the car, whatever you do." I did as she asked, and continued, "That's my ex-boyfriend. If you stop, I'm scared he'll come and try to open the door." Okay, this is serious, I thought. I made up my mind not to drive down highways. I wanted to avoid traffic lights, which would mean we would have to stop. When my car stops, the doors automatically unlock while the car is in drive. So I decided to take the back roads. And man, that was a bad idea. Thinking back on it now, I should have probably gone to a late-night diner or convenience store, somewhere bright with lots of people around. But I think that my friend would have freaked out if I even tried that. So I kept driving down these countryside lanes, the back roads, until my friend calmed down a little. The car behind was following every turn we made. The further we went from the city, the fewer cars were seen on the road with us. It got to a point where it was literally just us. The car behind was speeding up too, forcing me to go faster and faster. I asked my friend, "Why is this guy chasing us?" And she said, "I think I made him really angry. I don't want to stay at my place alone tonight." She then began to cry, and I didn't really get my answer. The situation we were in was getting more and more unnerving. I didn't know how it was going to end, and I didn't want to consider the possibilities. I kept driving. There wasn't much else I could do. But then something occurred to me. I had quite a small and light car, and the car behind was much bigger. What if I went down a narrow road? Maybe that would stop the guy from chasing us. He would be scared to damage his car. I decided to take that risk and turned down the next narrow road I found. I kept an eye on my navigation system to try and find a way back out of there. I didn't want to be stuck down some dead-end road. I needed to keep driving or at least get to someplace safe because I didn't want to send my friend home in the state she was in. I thought about trying the police, but I knew that the police wouldn't do anything about the guy. It seems like they only help after the fact, never before. My friend was sobbing next to me, but she stopped to apologize for getting me into this mess. I mean, I should have sensed something was up. She hadn't ever called me for a ride from a supermarket before. She said she called me because she didn't have anyone else she could turn to. I told her that it was okay. I just wanted to know where I should be driving her. And she replied, "Don't take me back to my house. If we did just lose him, that's where he'll be waiting for me. Can you take me to the train station?" I said that I could. But she could also stay at mine for the night. She vehemently refused. She said she had caused enough trouble. I realized something at that point. The stuff she had bought at the supermarket looked like she had been planning to run away. She even had some camping equipment. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't fully understand the situation, but I knew one thing. The man who was chasing us was very dangerous, if running away from her life in our town seemed to be her preferred option. She said that she would stay in a hotel that night. She would get off the train far away and lay low. She was going to hotel hop too. Make sure her location changed every now and then. I felt for her, I really did. She said that she felt like he was always watching her, and he knew how to find her. That's just so scary to me. I didn't want to ask about her ex, but I was curious as to why she was so scared of him finding her. I said something like, "He sounds like a real horrible guy, And she replied, "It's not just him who'll be looking for me. It's his group of friends too." That was frightening. Something really bad was going on. I managed to follow the narrow back roads back to the city, and I got her to the station, like she asked. I was confident that he wasn't following us anymore. I felt for sure that he had given up. She got out at the station, and we found out that the next available train would come in at 6 a.m. I couldn't leave her there for that long in the state she was in. I asked her to come with me to a McDonald's. I thought that we could talk things over a little, and I was right. She told me a little more about the situation and that ex of hers. She told me that he didn't take being broken up with very well. He attacked her. He made threats against her friends and family, and tried to use fear to coerce her into getting back with him. He was also convinced that she had been with his friends. He said all this after she found out he had been on a bunch of dating and hookup apps. One of her single friends showed her his profile, and she confronted him. She said that his friends are all a bunch of stalkers like him too. I was shocked and finding it a little hard to follow her story. Personally, I think they could have been as bad as one another with the cheating by the sounds of things. She turned to me and said, "I want you to forget about me, okay? I'm not going to have anything more to do with you." I mean, it's very sad to lose a friend, of course, but equally, I didn't want to get involved with these weird guys and be chased by random men at night. I was feeling conflicted. She began to cry again, and she kept saying, "It's really my fault this time." After dropping her off at the train station and helping her onto the platform with her bags, she turned to me and gave me 10,000 yen and said, "Thank you. I'll always be grateful for tonight." And that was the last time I ever saw her. I had tears in my eyes as I drove home from the station that night, but they felt like they instantly dried up when I noticed a certain car in the lane next to mine. I couldn't believe it. The guy who had followed me earlier was still out here, looking for us. I got goosebumps, but I tried not to make it obvious that I had noticed him. By some miracle, he didn't appear to notice me or my car, and after 4 or 5 pretty frightening minutes, he turned off in a different direction to me. As soon as I got home, I completely crashed out. It was the first time in a long time that I had been awake that late. Despite everything that happened that night, I'm glad that I answered her call. I mean, what might have happened to her? If I didn't, is something I don't want to ask myself. I never heard from her again. Fast forward to 3 months later, and I got a call from my friend's number. I was really interested to see how she was doing, so I answered it straight away. I quickly found out that it wasn't my friend on the other end of the phone. It sounded like someone wasn't even using a phone. By that, I mean it was kind of computer-like. The voice at the other end of the line asked the following question. "Hi, have you heard from my..." The man calling from her number seemed to be polite and friendly, but I knew he was likely one of the guys who was chasing her and me that night. I was a little scared to say anything at first, but then I managed to say, "Actually, I haven't heard from her in a very long time, so sorry I can't help you." "Ah, is that so? Well, then I'm sorry to have bothered you then." And the call ended. I was so scared, even though it wasn't happening to me. I had a way to contact her through a separate messaging app, but I didn't dare use it, just in case one of those guys or her ex had a way of tracking her messages. I hope she managed to start a new life, and although that call was scary, it told me that they hadn't managed to track her down. If you are out there, stay safe, my friend. I don't own a TV, and I don't watch TV. I have a computer with a monitor. But when I don't use it, I cover it with a cloth, so I can't see the screen. There's a good reason why I don't own a TV, and I want to share that reason with you. I want to know if anyone out there has experienced something similar. It happened when I was in high school, on a dark Saturday night in fall. I loved that time of year. I was a big horror movie fan back then, and there was a horror film I wanted to watch on TV. I decided that I was going to stay up and watch it. I'm an only child, so I didn't have any siblings to fight over the remote with, and my parents always went to bed early, so I figured that I would be able to sneak out of my room and watch the movie at kind of a low volume. My dad's a real snorer, so the TV didn't have to be super quiet. We had a 32-inch cathode ray tube TV. You remember the type, before everything was all plasma and LCD. It's one of those real chunky TVs like The Simpsons have. Back then, when I was a kid, that was a luxury item, to be honest. It boasted HD capabilities. So to watch my movie in the optimal spooky settings, I hit the lights and got myself comfy on the couch. I ended up dozing halfway through the movie though. I guess this was because I wasn't all that used to staying up late on weekday nights, and the movie was surprisingly boring. By the time I woke up, the movie was over, and there was just static on the screen. That used to happen quite a lot when I was a kid. When the broadcast ends, you just get static. I got up off the couch to shut off the TV, relying on the dim hallway light to guide my way. As I turned off the TV, the screen went dark, and I saw something that I'll never be able to forget. I was on my feet ready to leave the room, and I saw that there was another person in the room with me. Someone was stood right behind me. I tried to think logically. Was I seeing things? Was this some kind of mad reflection of the light? The more I thought about the possibilities, the more I found myself rooted to the spot I stood in. The person in the living room with me had long dark hair, and she looked like she was wearing a whitish dress. It could have either been a hospital gown or a night dress. I couldn't see her face. It was hidden beneath her hair. There was enough space for someone to pass into the room from behind me, but there couldn't be anyone there. I couldn't take my eyes off of that woman. I didn't want to take my eyes off of her. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. I had to, though. In order to leave the lounge, I needed to turn away from the TV due to the position of the furniture. I was so scared that when I turned, that woman would come into view. In real life, I'd see her with my own eyes, and not in the reflection on the TV screen. I thought that I needed to do something. I couldn't just stand there and wait for something to happen. I decided to turn, to see if I could see her in the flesh. I turned and something caught my eye. It was like a flash or something. Like I could see something my mind couldn't comprehend. I remember that part so clearly, but unfortunately, or maybe I should say fortunately, I can't remember anything beyond that point. I was woken up by my mother and scolded for sleeping on the couch. I looked around, and the room was empty apart from my mum and me, and now it was the morning. Since that experience, I became reluctant to watch TV, especially at night. I wouldn't be in the same room as the TV at night if it was turned off. I was terrified of seeing that woman again. After a few years, my dad eventually got rid of that TV. I think that would have been around the time when digital broadcasting started. He sold the TV online to someone who lived in our area. He didn't think he'd get much for it, since it was outdated, but unbeknownst to him, his high-definition, cathode ray tube television was sought after by technology enthusiasts, and he got a pretty reasonable amount for it. A few more years went by, and I wound up working in a thrift store, part-time, while I saved up for college. The manager came back from some purchasing trip he had been on with some fresh stock. While I helped him to unload all of the new stock from his van, I noticed something that sent a shiver through me. He had bought a 32-inch HD cathode ray tube TV. Me and him set the TV down, and he asked me to check the power to see if it worked. It was weird to see a TV like the one we used to have again. We set it down, wiped the screen clean, and then something caught my eye. I thought to myself, hang on, isn't this the one we had? The reason that I thought it was ours, because I got in a lot of trouble once, because I scratched the right-hand side of the TV screen with some toy. I couldn't believe that the TV my dad sold to some guy years ago had made its way back to me. After I was done cleaning it, I told my manager that I believed that it was our old family TV. I liked my manager, so I even told him about that frightening experience I had with the woman in the lounge. My manager was very knowledgeable about technology, and he also seemed to be into spooky things. So I thought he would get a kick out of me and my story, at the very least. He tried to explain what happened to me that night. He said it was kind of like photography, in a sense. You know how some people claim to have captured pictures of spirits in photos? A lot of those photos are kind of old black and white ones. He said that the type of TV that we had may have been capable of something similar. The new types of TVs, like the flat screen ones, don't have the same technology in them, so don't worry about your TVs. Roughly speaking, a cathode ray tube uses a method to bend emitted light using a magnet force and project it from the back side of the glass surface. This is just my manager's hypothesis, but he said that perhaps spirits are attracted to the light and the magnetic force, and they enter the space in the cathode ray tube. Well, that didn't make any sense to me, and when I tried to make it make sense, all I could imagine was a ghost going inside a TV to show itself on the outside of a TV. Well, that's what he thought I saw. So we just kind of left the conversation there and went back to work. I wasn't really satisfied with that explanation though. The woman was reflected in the room. I believe that this type of TV had the capability of revealing things that the human eye cannot see. It was odd though, because no one in our house ever said anything about it being haunted. I even asked my dad in later life if it was an accident property or a home with a history, and he said it wasn't. So I still didn't have any answers. I just got on with my work, thinking that what I saw was a one-off, and the only strange goings-on was the coincidence that brought this TV back to me. My boss asked me to test if it still worked though, so that's what I did. The TV wasn't capable of picking up a signal, and we didn't have an aerial in the storeroom, so I just hooked up a DVD player to test it. I put a DVD in, and the TV appeared to be working well. It was impressive. That TV was almost as old as I was. And get this, we didn't even have a remote control for it. I just used one from the same manufacturing company we had lying around, and it worked perfectly. After doing the test with the DVD player, I switched the TV to the channels, and as expected, there was nothing but static. That was natural because there was no antenna fitted. I went to report that the TV appeared to be in good working order to my boss. I turned it off and turned to leave. The TV faded to black, and I saw the shelves of books and junk behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks. There should be no one in that room but me, but I wasn't alone. There was a woman in the storeroom. Not a colleague, but a literal ghost from the past. It was her, the woman I had seen all those years ago in my lounge. I couldn't move. Just like last time, I was too scared to do anything. I just stared at her in the TV screen's reflection. I don't know how long this standoff went on for. Minutes? Seconds? But then I realized, like I did when I was younger, that I couldn't just stand there. I had to move. I had to get away from that TV. Just like the time before, I turned to face the woman in order to leave. I had to step around all the new stock we had brought into the storeroom. I was terrified to face her, but unbelievably curious. I turned, and as soon as she came into my field of vision, I felt like there was an internal bang in my head, and I lost consciousness. That is the last thing I remember before I woke up. The boss found me passed out on the floor in front of that TV. He had heard a loud bang, which I guess was the sound of me falling. I went home that day earlier than scheduled. I don't know what the manager did with that TV, but I'm guessing that he either hid it from me or sold it pretty quickly because I didn't see it again. So that's pretty much why I don't own a TV. I don't want to risk it because every time I passed out, I was always woken up by someone. I live alone these days, so if I saw her again, I would be out until someone came and found me, I guess, or maybe it could be a kind of 3 strikes and you're out situation with her. It's just a theory, and probably not a very good one. I wondered if the guy my dad sold the TV to had ever seen the same woman. Maybe the manager bought the TV off his next of kin. I think about that sometimes. This happened when I used to work in a supermarket. A typhoon had been reported to be approaching our town, and that day there were a lot of customers entering the store from the morning onwards. I think they all wanted to get everything they needed before the heavy rain began to fall. That rainfall wouldn't begin until the evening, by the time it started to get dark out. It got darker quicker than usual, as it was autumn here. There were almost no customers coming and going by the time it was dark. I say almost no customers because some came in now and then, but nothing like a normal weekday night. I looked up as I was sorting out the shopping baskets to see a mother of about 30 and a girl about the age of 6 walk in. I greeted them quickly, and then went back to organizing the baskets by the entrance. While I was looking down, they must have walked into the store. By the time I was back inside, I saw them over by the vegetable aisle. Something was a little off about them to me. I will let you know what I found so off-putting. So, most people when they're shopping or browsing will look up and down the aisles at products, maybe even reach out to check some items. You know how to shop, I don't even know why I feel the need to mention it, but with that in mind, the mother and daughter was just pacing up and down the aisles without really looking at anything. They were just looking forward, slightly higher than the shelf line. They didn't even pick up a basket. I couldn't figure out the reason they came in here in the first place. They weren't even shopping. But then I thought to myself, hang on, they might be trying to steal something. It didn't look like they were, but there was definitely something up with a pair of them. I kept an eye on them as they passed through the meat section. Then suddenly they passed through the staff-only door next to the meat. I rushed over to them to let them know they shouldn't be back there, but by the time I pushed the door open, they were gone. I couldn't find them. It really looked like they had headed in there, but maybe I was mistaken. It played on my mind for the rest of my shift. I expected to see them at some point during the remainder of my shift, but I never did. As I was getting ready to leave for the night, I jokingly mentioned my encounter to the manager. I was expecting a laugh out of him, or for him to say something like, that's because you were tired and it was a slow day, but no, that's not what I got. That's not what he said at all. He took his glasses off, turned to me in his swivel chair and said, I've seen them too. For some reason, sometimes when there's a typhoon, you see them, and there's others. They come in and enter that room near the back of the store. I didn't know what to make of it the first time I saw them, so I asked one of the employees. You won't know her, she's retired, she went before you joined. She told me that she thought that those two were the victims of a road traffic accident that happened not too far from here. Now, she said that accident happened about 15 years ago. Apparently the cause of the accident was down to the low visibility due to an approaching typhoon. Apparently they were on their way to our store. So they come back to the store when a typhoon is getting closer, possibly because they are tied to carry out the same task, as it was never completed. I don't know why they go to the back room there. Maybe the store layout was different before I joined. Do you know the crossroads? Just a little ways up from the loading area? Yeah, that's where they say that fatal accident took place. I'm not sure if this is all true, but it makes sense to me. And the other employees believed it. There are plans to completely renovate the store in the next year, and it makes me feel a little sad because I don't know what will happen to them. Where will they go? His story made me feel sad, but not scared. If I see them next time a typhoon approaches, I won't be scared. I wonder if there's something I can do, or should do, to show them the way. I wouldn't like to ward them off by blessing the area, or laying salt everywhere. I just want them to be at peace. This didn't happen to me, but to my mum. Back when my mother was single and living alone, she worked as an admin assistant in an office. Like I said, she was living alone in a small apartment. She said that the guy who lived next door to her was kind of off. She had a weird feeling about him. The reason why she thought he was strange was because on several occasions when she tried to say hello to him, he didn't respond. He just stood there with a blank expression on his face, staring at her. She said she didn't like it. She didn't know what he was thinking, and she gave up trying to be pleasant after about the third attempt of saying hello to him. One night, she woke up in the middle of the night for a reason she couldn't put her finger on. She didn't need the bathroom, and she hadn't heard any loud noises. She just woke up. She said that she was having a very long and intricate dream. She was in a deep state of sleep, and suddenly she was awake. She said it was like a switch had been flipped, and just as mysteriously as she awoken, a question jumped to the forefront of her mind. Did I lock the door? After that intrusive question entered her mind, she couldn't make it leave. It lingered, and worry began to set in as she lay in bed, in the dark. Like an itch that needed scratching, she felt as if she had to go and check. She crept over to the door and realized that the door was unlocked, just as she feared. She blamed it on her own carelessness and turned the key and locked the door. In that exact moment, she felt the doorknob slowly and silently twist in her hand. She was incredibly frightened, but she managed to retain her composure and keep quiet. She had only just turned the key in the door, and had she hesitated a second longer, then the person the other side of the door would have been opening an unlocked door. She put her eye to the peephole and saw the figure of a man outside. She recognized him almost instantly as the neighbor next door. She covered her mouth as not to scream as the door knob slowly turned again. A few agonizing seconds crawled by, and then her neighbor gave up and walked away. Now, my mum has a trusting kind of nature, so she decided she would put this down as her neighbor making an honest mistake and mistaking his apartment for hers, maybe even got a little drunk. She decided not to worry about it. A couple of days went by and her neighbor moved out of the apartment complex. It was around the same time as my mum wanted to move out too. She was cleaning and packing her things away when she noticed something. She was cleaning one of her balcony windows at the time. It was particularly fogged up in the top right corner. On closer inspection, she saw fingerprints on the glass. The fingerprints were on the outside of the balcony window. She didn't know how they could have gotten there at first, but then she remembered something. Her creepy, unresponsive neighbor that lived on the right-hand side. And that was where she found the fingerprints. There had to be a connection. She stepped out onto her balcony and took a look at the railing, and there were some traces of fingerprints there too. It looked as if the man next door was climbing over the balcony partition and peering into her apartment. My mum laughed when she told me this story. I couldn't believe it. She literally never gets up at night. She's a total sound sleeper, but that night intuition kicked in and made her make sure that the door was locked. I think if you wake up in the dead of night with a similar concern or a strange feeling like my mum had, get up. There is one thing that freaks me out. If the neighbor got the apartment wrong, why didn't he try to put the key in the lock? Why would he just silently turn the door handle? It freaks me out to imagine what her neighbor's intentions were. When I was in elementary school, I got sick and I had to take a day off of school. I had a cold and a fever. My parents both worked, and I was home alone. It was pretty early in the morning, and I was still taking medicine in bed upstairs. The house felt unusually quiet for that time of day. But that was only until I heard a knock at the door. Then I heard a voice call out, "Newspaper man, got your newspaper delivery here." I didn't answer the door, of course. After a while, the knocking at the door stopped, and the newspaper man must have thought no one was home and he gave up. He did call out about 3 times, and even at that age I thought that was a little excessive for a newspaper delivery. I slept for a while, but then I woke up when I heard some noises coming from downstairs. I looked at the time and it was about midday, 12 p.m. "Newspaper man here. Got your newspaper." The guy called out again, but it wasn't as loud as before. It was much softer, and this time he didn't even knock. What the hell was this? I wondered. Then it sounded like the newspaper man was having a conversation with someone else down there. It sounded as if there was multiple people there. I could hear at least 2 voices down there. The 2 voices were coming from downstairs, and I could only hear this because I had a fever and I had my window open, so I could hear everything that was going on outside downstairs quite clearly. I was suspicious, so I kept listening. Just as soon as the 2 voices started their conversation, I heard sounds as if they were walking down the side of my house. I was scared now. I was only about, 5, 6, 7 when this happened. And I was a young girl home alone feeling sick. I shouldn't have been left alone, really. Our house is surrounded by a fence, and we have this gravel moat running around our house to prevent crime. Well, that's what my dad used to say anyway. If you get over the fence, then we would hear the sound of shoes on the gravel. That's how I knew the newspaper man and the owner of the second voice had entered our garden. I heard the sound of 2 pairs of feet crunching on the gravel. It sounded like they were heading towards the back door. I got even more frightened when I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. If they had turned back, then I would have heard them walking away, but I didn't, which meant to me that they were still there, or maybe even, God forbid, in the house. It didn't sound like someone entered the house, though. I couldn't really be positive of that fact since I was on the 2nd floor, and I didn't have a good view of the back door from the stairs. The only thing I could confirm was the fact that there wasn't the usual newspaper delivery car out front. And also, what kind of newspaper man goes to the back door? I was panicking. I was in bed with a high fever, so at some points I could hardly believe it was reality and not some horrible fever nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Even though I was terrified, I was curious. I just had to head downstairs to see if I could see what was going on. So I crept downstairs as slowly and as quietly as I could, shaking like a leaf with each step. There was no one there. The house was completely empty. Did I imagine it all? Was that something paranormal, or was that just a near miss? After that, I went upstairs and I slept with the TV on until Mum and Dad got home. I managed to convince myself that I had been imagining things in the end, but something happened later that made me change my mind. A few days later, I heard that there was a burglary in the house next door to ours. The police were called out and everything. At the time, the only thing I could think of was, wow, I'm so glad that wasn't our house. And then I remembered what happened. So what I think happened with those noises that I heard was the following. I think 2 men were in the area pretending to be a delivery service in order to scout out potential homes to rob. I don't know why they didn't just break into our house that day. Or where they went after I heard them at the back door. But I just count myself lucky that I didn't come face to face with an intruder that day. It was a really frightening experience. I lived in a rental apartment that required me to be notified of its history before I started living there. What I mean by that is the real estate was legally bound to inform me of what happened in that apartment before I signed the dotted line. It happened about 20 years ago, and recently I've been getting into these online stories, so I decided to share my experience. The reason I chose to live in a home with a history was simple. It was a lot cheaper than anywhere else in the location I wanted to live in. Just in case the rules are different nowadays, let me quickly go over what the definition was back in the early 2000s. When renting, if there has been a death in the property due to suicide, murder, or some kind of fatal accident, the new tenant will be notified in detail of what happened. Interestingly enough, they would do the same in other instances for what they called at the time objectional facilities. Hi, sorry to cut in. It's Jay here again. Now, objectional facilities is an odd phrase. It's very vague because it doesn't really give us much of a clue what it actually means. So I'll try to break it down a bit based on what I've read. An objectional facility would be one of the following: funeral parlors, industrial waste disposal facilities, known hotspots of criminal activities, and adult entertainment establishments. Back to the story. In my case, the apartment I wanted to rent didn't have that much of an interesting story. An old woman lived there, and sadly, she died alone. To me, it seemed like a really peaceful death. Dying due to old age isn't a terrible way to go, to be honest. Apparently, she died at the age of 90. I didn't see any good reason why this would put me off living there. I didn't think that I was about to rent someplace haunted, so I signed the dotted line. I remember me and the real estate agent were smiling and kind of joking around as I'd signed. I was certain that I was getting an absolute deal. I ended up moving out after 2 months. I think you would too. Let me tell you why. That apartment was seemingly always full of stale, humid air, and there seemed to be a constant maggot infestation too. It wasn't just that though. If I left something on the floor for a while, for instance my bag, I had a satchel, it would start growing mold within a couple of days at the most. It was the same with magazines and books. It was really gross. Food spoiled really quickly in that apartment too. I ended up relying on jerky. And when I thought that I could rely on that for a while, I came home one night to find maggots devouring the jerky. I had only bought it about 3 days ago. It was around that point I thought to myself, hang on, this isn't that normal, is it? I went to cancel my contract, and I spoke with that same agent who signed me up, and he said something weird, and to be honest, really unprofessional, when I told him about the maggots I kept finding. I guess maggots that eat people are pretty powerful, huh? And with that, he laughed. I'll never forget that. I asked him what the hell he was talking about, and he elaborated. The peaceful death that I had been told about, and that I thought the old lady who lived there before me succumbed to, wasn't exactly all it was made out to be. While it was true that she died of natural causes, the real estate agent failed to tell me how long it was before the body was discovered. She died during summer and her body went undiscovered for over a month. He said that that's what they call the prime rot period, and that phrase gave me a shudder. He said that was the point that the residents could smell it. I understood the maggots now. One night before I left, oh yeah, by the way, I had to wait to leave at the end of the month. I couldn't line up my next place in time, so I was just stuck there. Anyways, before I left, I was trying to get things in order for moving day. I moved some heavy piece of furniture out of the way to make room for the boxes I was filling in the living room. There was a dark stain in the shape of a person in the fetal position beneath it. And it was right by the area that I would eat and drink in. It was horrible. I think that they didn't even attempt to clean the place properly before they moved me in. I don't think they attempted to exterminate the pests either. So, I don't know if I was really haunted. Maybe just traumatized. This happened when I worked for a relatively small company. I worked in a quiet little office. I was new and pretty eager to impress. I had something big on the next day, and I think it was a presentation or something. I wanted to stay late and do some overtime in order to be properly prepared for the presentation the following morning. Usually the president of the company would be in the office until everyone left. He was a real workaholic. However, that night, and at that point it was night, by the way, we were pulling some crazy hours. That night he wasn't there. I can't remember exactly what, but I think he was doing something else, which meant he couldn't be there. I got an email from him at one point, and I told him that I'd be working overtime. I remember not getting that email too late. I had almost gotten all that I needed to get done after about an hour and a half later. I just needed to check over my work. The finish line was in sight. And in order to check, I needed a fresh cup of coffee. I stood up in the office. As I pulled my chair backwards, I realized that I hadn't looked up for a while. It was the first time that I was in the office alone, so it was kind of liberating. I guess I could do whatever I wanted. I decided to play some music through my phone. Back then, if you wanted music on your phone, you had to manually put it on your phone through a cable to your laptop or computer. I found the song I wanted to hear and I pressed play. Not 10 seconds into the song, I heard 3 knocks in quick succession against the entrance door to the office. I grabbed my phone and shut off the music. I thought to myself, oh God, someone's going to complain now. Almost forgetting that it was late, and that we were not exactly operating in business hours. What I mean by that is, I failed to remember that there would be no good reason why someone would be knocking at the office door. I froze, but I knew that we had a little monitor system by the door at the reception that showed outside of the door. I wandered over it to take a look at who was knocking, but there was no one out there. I was scared. I was alone in the office, and I was only a 20-year-old female. If this was going to be a break-in, then I don't think I could have done anything to stop them, to protect the company's properties. I felt defenseless. I hoped whoever was knocking would just go away. I was terrified to hear another bunch of knocks. I thought that would be the worst thing imaginable at that point, but I was wrong. The knocks didn't come. But all of a sudden, the power went out. I couldn't help but feel scared. I traced my way back to my desk using my hands to guide me, and I found my mobile phone on the desk, and I called my boss. I was shaking with fear. I didn't want someone to break in. Now that I had my phone, I wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't care about that final proofread anymore. I went to get up from my office chair, but I felt a dead weight against my left leg. I thought that I had just wrapped it around my handbag or my umbrella, but then I knew that wasn't it. I felt hands, grasping hands, wrap around my leg. They gripped on tight. I looked down and aimed the dim light from my phone's home screen towards my legs. I swear it looked like a woman's arms. I screamed and I screamed. I kicked frantically. I saw her head turn, and I thought that the owner of those hands was about to face me, and I knew deep down I didn't want to look into her eyes. I ran through the formation of empty desks in the dark, clattering my limbs against them. I had too much adrenaline in my body to care about any damage I did to myself. I stopped by the door, remembering that banging sound I heard earlier, and just froze in place. I slumped in a corner for a few moments, until I heard the sound of a chair moving somewhere in the back of the office near my desk. That was it for me. I got out of there as soon as I could. I did actually get a call back from my boss later, just to check in, as he didn't hear from me and had a missed call. He said that he called the office a couple of times and my phone was engaged. I guess that in the melee, I must have knocked my phone off the hook. I knew why he was worried now. I don't know what happened that night, but I guess it might have been brought on by overworking perhaps. I don't know though. When I think back to the way those hands felt against my leg, and the way that whatever was down there looked so human, that makes me think that I might have experienced something. I have no idea what the banging sound was, or if it's connected. I hope not. Because if it was, then I imagine that whatever was clinging to my legs might have been clinging onto their life in another time and place. Either way, it was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I heard a part of this story from my grandpa. I was staying with him one Saturday night. I can't remember why, maybe it was just to give my parents the night off. I always looked forward to visiting my grandparents though. They lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and there were loads of fun things to do there. I loved exploring the woods, looking for bugs and going down to the river, that kind of thing. But the place I loved the most at my grandparents' was this little log cabin he had built on the mountainside of his property. I was in 4th grade at the time, and when I was that age, the cabin felt as if it was my own secret little base. I was so excited to go there. I loved sleeping out in the cabin. It wasn't far from the main house, but far enough to make it feel as if you were sleeping out in the woods alone, especially at that age. I loved waking up early, when the sunlight shone through the windows of the lodge, and then going bug hunting. I loved collecting beetles. I always released them there. My grandfather was a keen fisherman, and he would often head out deep into the mountains to do some stream fishing. Or he would head down to the shoreline. He lived close to the sea. So when I woke up that morning, I knew I had the run of the place to myself. I left to hunt bugs in the woods. Things went pretty much downhill as soon as I headed into those woods. I mean, literally. They were on the mountainside, like I said, and I slipped and injured my leg really badly. I was crying and trying to limp back towards the general direction of the cabin. The pain was getting worse with each step. I didn't really want to look down at the wound. I knew it was bleeding badly as I could feel the wetness. It was midsummer. I was sweaty enough as it was, but there was a new kind of sweat on my brow, a cold one. I was really worried of getting lost mainly, worried of not making it back to the cabin. I felt as if I needed a moment to compose myself, and I sat down there on a fallen tree limb. My head was feeling incredibly, I don't know if this is the best word to describe it, but fuzzy. And that feeling is the last thing I can remember. The rest of my experience is what my grandpa told me. My grandpa went back to check on me in the cabin when he came back from fishing and found that I wasn't there. He panicked and went out to search for me. He looked around the area restlessly but couldn't find me. Later he returned to the cabin and saw me there lying on the ground in front of it. He said that he saw 2 girls about my age running away from the cabin as he returned. He believed that those 2 girls brought me back. He tried to catch up to them, but he couldn't. The sun had begun to set at that point, and they were much too quick for my tired old grandpa. They disappeared into the woods. He shouted out to them, but they didn't respond. It didn't look to him as if I had been placed on the ground by the cabin. It looked like I had been dropped or thrown. It seemed really strange to him. My legs were badly swollen. Grandpa scooped me up into his arms and rushed me to a hospital. It was there that it was discovered that I had broken my leg. The doctor described the break as one common with a fall from height. It gets weirder and weirder. Before dawn that morning, Grandpa said that he experienced something strange. When he was fishing, he said that there was a huge glowing object out over the sea. He said that it was speeding above the water, and he couldn't catch a single fish that morning. He thought that he had seen a UFO. I have had years to think about the experience, and sometimes I wonder if the girls he saw running away from my unconscious body were perhaps something not of this earth. My grandpa is adamant that those girls are aliens. He's a bit of a wild theorist though. He says that there is a buried city under the Totori sand dunes. He often says outrageous things like that. I didn't have much faith to begin with that I had met extraterrestrials, but I cannot say something very strange and disturbing didn't happen, because it did. I sat down. My head was a blur. I woke up in hospital with a broken leg 8 hours later. That's the facts. I know that is true. But what happened in those 8 hours will forever likely remain a mystery. I work in the apparel industry, and due to rising costs and declining quality coming out of China, my company decided to develop a new business opportunity to consolidate suppliers in Bangladesh. So I went to visit a supplier in Bangladesh to receive a pitch. I would be there to check the quality, perform some on-site surveys, and just see how things work out there. So this happened when I went to Bangladesh. I was blown away when I got there. Urban areas like Dhaka were so modern and just amazing, they rivaled Tokyo. Having said that, the countryside looked like it was right out of the movie My Neighbor Totoro. By that I mean there were a lot of rural areas without access to sufficient electricity or running water. I was kind of taken aback that their factories were located in an area like that. Let me just get it straight, I don't dislike that kind of environment at all. So to be honest, I was enjoying looking around. I was discussing things with the employees of the factory, and they were just all so nice. They were very interested in Japan and our way of life. And I have to say that I felt the same about Bangladesh. After a few days into my visit, I was offered to stay in the village with the locals. To be honest, the hotel I was staying in was in a place called Barisal, which was a little away from the factory and the village area, so I thought, why not? I had a rare opportunity to see how the locals lived. Plus, I wouldn't exactly be doing much in my hotel room anyways. The village seemed pretty wealthy. They had an arcade with some really cool PS2 games in there. It was great to see those. They had their own version of a convenience store too. One thing I noticed pretty quickly was that it seemed that foreigners were pretty rare for their village. People were crowding around me. It felt like I was some kind of celebrity. By the way, it was just men who crowded around me. I'm also a man. I didn't see any women out and about. I spent the night at Mr. Aradad's house. That's a slight pseudonym, by the way. And I had a night that I would never forget. He and his family welcomed me in with open arms, and I really enjoyed my time with them. The night grew late, and I headed up to the bed they had given me for the night. I was messing around on my laptop at the desk in the bedroom. I think I was playing some game I had downloaded. And I was just about to shut the laptop down to get some sleep when I felt something. I felt a presence of someone in the room with me. Not just one person, but many, maybe a dozen. I can't explain it well, but it was kind of like when you're in a movie theater in the dark. There are just people sat in silent anticipation, not talking. People just collectively being there. Do you know what I mean? You can feel a presence, and you can sense that there is breathing in the room, little things like that. The village is completely without power at night. The only light that was on in Mr. Aradad's house was the light coming from my laptop. I turned the laptop away from me and kind of waved it around the room to see if the light from my screen revealed anyone in the room with me. But of course, no one was there. I was alone in what felt like a room full of presences. Realizing that gave me the tingles, but I told myself that it was all in my mind, and I was probably imagining things because I was in some place new. I forced myself to shut my laptop down and the room fell dark. It was time to sleep. I crawled into bed and tried to ignore my own thoughts. I tried as hard as I could, but I couldn't convince myself. I knew that there was something in that room with me, and it was still there. I thought that there was a spirit in the room with me, and I decided to open my eyes to look around because I had always wanted to see something paranormal. I couldn't see anything though, because it was so dark. Still, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I don't know if my eyes adjusted to the dark or something, but I saw something that looked like a white, horizontal line drawn on the wall. The line was broken in some areas, but it looked like a line. I was just staring at that line that seemed to have appeared out of the dark. It was like these tiny, white moving shapes that just arrived and formed a vague line. It was very odd. I don't know why, but when I saw that, I felt very calm. It was soothing to me. I felt relaxed, and before I knew it, I had slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep. The following morning, I toyed with the idea of telling Mr. Aradad about what happened, but in the end, I felt like there was no need to scare him unnecessarily, so I kept quiet. But later, I remembered something that Mr. Aradad said. When I was surrounded by the locals, he said something similar to this. For some of these villagers, you may be the only foreign person that they will ever see. So this is why they are drawn to you. They want to hear your stories and see how you are different from them. Sorry, things are a little different here in comparison to the city. Please forgive them, they don't mean to be rude. So with that in mind, I can't help but wonder if some local spirits or apparitions wanted to make contact with me too that night. If that's the case, then it's probably not the worst haunting or paranormal experience anyone could have, right? To date, it has been my only paranormal experience, and I'm fine with that. I recently had a very frightening experience. It all started when my friend started living alone. I'm just going to call her A for the sake of anonymity. A lived at home until she was in her early 20s and loved it, but she felt as if it was time to spread her wings and find her own place. She found a really great place for a decent price and began living alone. I remember how excited she was about moving in. Well, it was all smiles to begin with, but after about a month, she came to the realization that she was being stalked, and she had no idea of the identity of her stalker. When she told me that she thought she was being stalked, I thought, wow, that's a bit of a bold claim. I wondered if she kept seeing the same person in different places and was a little paranoid. I was proven very wrong. It was serious. Whenever she came home from work, she would always check the mail. Not too long into her new life in her apartment, she found something in her letter cage at the front door. There was an envelope. It was just a blank envelope. It must have been hand-delivered. She said that before she opened it, she felt sick to her stomach. She didn't tell anyone besides me and her family her new apartment's address, so she knew that this envelope was hiding some strange contents. She opened it up and read what was inside. Your underwear color is pretty flashy. That was all that was written there. When she told me that, I was genuinely terrified for her. I thought of how I would react if I found that, and how frightened that would make me feel, especially if I had just started living alone for the first time. She received that creepy letter about a month after she moved in. She asked me what I would do if I were her, and I told her honestly. I would go back home, and I would live with my parents for a while, maybe for good. The apartment might be the target of a stalker. Maybe that's why the last person moved out. and maybe that's why she got a great deal on it. That's what I thought at the time. A wasn't interested in going back home. Her new place was much closer to work for her commute. She could get to work in 20 minutes or so. If she went home, then it would take 3 times, if not 4 times longer. She said that she was looking for a new place to live, and she told the renters she wanted to go. She seemed like she had a hold on things. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad, but for me, I wouldn't want to spend another second in that apartment if I received a letter like that. Things kind of simmered down for a while, maybe close to a month. I didn't really hear from A again during that time. One evening I got a message from her. All it said was, "There's been another letter." She took a photo of the contents of the letter, and there were just 5 sentences. I wish I had the photo to share, but it happened about 3 phones ago. When the photo downloaded, I read the words, and I gasped. Here are the sentences. "Your hair is too long. You'd look even cuter with short hair. Don't wear a skirt again. I want to see you smile more. I love you." There seemed to be no context, no theme running through the message. The handwriting was almost kind of scratchy. Seeing that really disturbed me. It was like a window into someone else's mind. I couldn't help but imagine how horrible it would be for A to have those horrible words in her home. I instantly messaged her back, and I said, "Come over. You can stay at mine tonight." She replied, "I'm too scared to even open my door right now." I rode the train to her side of town and literally bundled her into a taxi and took her back to mine. She stayed with her parents and at my place after that second letter. I guess she was staying away from that apartment for about a week or so. Even though she grabbed a few necessary items before leaving her place, she needed more after that week. She called the manager and told him everything that had happened so far. I said I would go back with her as moral support. I already had imagined that I would stand by the door while she stuffed her suitcase. We met the apartment owner, and he went with us to her apartment. As we got up the stairs, before we got anywhere you could consider close to her door, we all noticed something. There was a mound of letters sticking out of her door. We didn't want to get any closer. I know I felt that way, and the shocked gasp that my friend uttered told me that she felt the same. She stopped. I knew that she wouldn't go anywhere near that apartment when she handed me the key to her door. I decided I would do it for her. My friend was in need, and I knew that she was stressed out. I headed into her apartment, where the apartment owner stood by the door. I ignored all the letters jutting out of her mail slot and overflowing the letter cage. I gathered the things that I thought A would need the most, and I grabbed the letters and stuffed them into a plastic bag, and then I ran for it. I threw away all of those letters. I didn't open a single one of them. A said that she would never return to that apartment again, and stayed with her parents. Thankfully, the apartment owner actually had a heart and allowed her to leave without incurring any charges or being difficult about it. Since that experience, A has showed no interest in living alone again, which is to the delight of her more than slightly controlling parents, in my opinion. They love having her back home. They weren't that sympathetic from what she told me. Maybe they saw it as a lesson she was supposed to learn for some unknown reason. She's not just scared of leaving her family home anymore, she's now scared of letters and any kind of mail. I guess if you have an experience like that, you can imagine how living alone again can be absolutely terrifying. She seems to be carrying a lot of trauma. It's not nice to see. I get it though, seeing those letters spilling out of her door and wedged in the mail slot gives me the creeps. I still dread to think of the content of those letters. Hi, just a very quick message. Please subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. I hate to ask this. I don't like to make a habit of it, but I've learned through the analytics that about 70% of viewers are not subscribed, so if you want to hear more stories you haven't heard from Japan, please consider subscribing. That's all. Here's the bells. It's not my story, but something one of my friends told me. He majored in biology and looked for any part-time work which related to his field of study. He was on the lookout for work in the agricultural sector, anything to do with animal research, etc. He landed this job collecting specimens. It was pretty demanding, but he was well paid for it. It sounds pretty easy or fun when you think of it, in terms of walking around and collecting plant life or insects, but it was much tougher than it sounded. He had to go deep into the mountainous woods to find the specimens required. I only remembered what he told me the other day when I saw something in the news about bats, so I decided to share it. So one day he was out in the mountains of Nara Prefecture, and he was taking a survey of the number of bats in the area with a co-worker. He knew that there were some ghost towns out there in Nara. You know, a few abandoned villages and settlements. Apparently these decaying and dilapidated buildings made the perfect home for bats. They provide the requisite darkness and solitude that they strive in. The job was to investigate and report. They headed out into an abandoned mining village and discovered what he described as a strange house. They were intrigued by the house and decided to have a look inside. The house was naturally an old one. I mean that in the sense that it was built in the old Japanese style. These buildings are still about in Japan. Anyway, the reason why it piqued his interest was because it looked like the entrances had been boarded up, and it was windowless. Well, to them, it must have looked like bat paradise, so they decided to take a look inside. My friend's colleague said something that reassured my friend at the time. He said that when people leave the village, they usually board up their homes. It made sense, and the house looked abandoned, so they proceeded with confidence. What a bad move that was. As soon as they dismantled the boards at the entrance and got in, they were shocked to see the sight of 6 children sat around a table inside a clearly abandoned house. When their shock gave way, they tried to speak to the kids in there, and when they tried, the children just looked at the ground and pretended they couldn't hear or acknowledge their existence. My friend said at one point he thought that he might be looking at some very lifelike mannequins or dolls, but he knew that they were real. They wore very basic clothes. He said the type that are the cheapest in the supermarket, and all their haircuts looked kind of uniform. They had the same kind of length of hair. It was dark, so we couldn't clearly identify each gender. They stood there, calling out to the kids sat in the chairs. Each time the kids remained unresponsive, until they asked one question. "Where did you come from?" And this was the only question they responded to. They just pointed to the back of the room in unison. Although they were reluctant to leave the kids behind, they felt as if they had a duty of care to check out where those kids pointed. It was dark at the back, and they had to put their flashlights on. There was this long, winding hallway that must have elongated, far longer than the length of any normal house. It was almost tunnel-like at points. Eventually they found some door at the end of this tunnel, and after a while they summoned up enough courage to throw it open. But it was locked. They said that when they looked around the floor with their flashlights, they found several sets of adult footprints. Due to the research they had been involved with, they concluded that the footprints were likely fresh. They drew the conclusion that the kids had been brought to this abandoned house and then confined there by their captors. Once they realized this, they ran as fast as they could back to the room they saw the children in, and to their shock, the kids were gone. There was no one there. They hoped that the kids had escaped through the hole that they had made when they gained entrance into the abandoned building. I mean, it's possible. They might have seen it as their only chance. They said that they stayed out there shouting and calling for the kids until the sun went down, but they were nowhere to be found. They went back inside and looked around to see if there were any other places they could be hiding in the abandoned house, but once again they came up with nothing. My friend's coworker turned to him and asked, "Hey, do you think those kids were real?" Well, that question alone creeped the hell out of my friend and rocked his confidence in the events that had just unfurled. They both realized that there wasn't much else they could do out there, in the middle of nowhere, in the dying light, so they decided to head back down the mountains and towards signs of life. They needed the authorities to get involved, and they did. The police said that the whole area would be under investigation. I don't know what you think, but I think my friend saw living people in that house and not some kind of apparitions. I'm glad that they got there when they did. And I guess I'm glad that everyone got out of there when they did. And I hope that goes the same for the kids. The other day I was out for a drive. I needed to get some shopping done, so I figured I would combine the two activities. I loved going out on drives. As I was approaching the store, a car cut in front of me. It was kind of annoying, definitely dangerous, but to be honest, I didn't care all that much. I just didn't care. I'm not one for road rage. It was a hot day, so the windows were down in my car. And the windows were down in the car in front. I could hear the guy driving the car arguing with the person in the passenger seat. He was so loud, I couldn't tell if he was yelling at his kid or his wife. I just thought, whoa, what a dick. He was gesturing wildly, and in glimpses I would see his face in the rear view mirror. He looked really heated. It was an intense situation. I was wondering what was going on. I wanted to get away from that car since I felt he was heading for an accident. I was worried for whoever was in that car. The light turned green, and we continued our separate journeys. And I was thankful that he was heading in a different direction. But then the guy suddenly switched lanes, almost causing another accident. This now meant that I would be side by side with him and his car at the next set of lights. I was beyond curious at this point. I just wanted to see what was happening in his car. Maybe give him a piece of my mind too if he was going off at his kid or his wife. I pulled up alongside his car and I saw the driver. He was a middle-aged man. I leaned forward and craned my neck to see who he had been shouting at, while we were both waiting for the light to change. I saw a mannequin in the passenger seat. Its vacant stare met mine. I immediately got goosebumps. Despite it being a summer's day, I had to turn my head away from it. The bad driver and the mannequin turned right, and I continued forward. I didn't sleep all that well that night for some reason. I wonder what they were arguing about. Hey, have any of you ever felt like you have been cursed? Well, this is my experience with a cursed object. My company often moves its employees around. We got transferred to different areas of the country all the time. So this happened in a place called Yamaguchi in Hagi. I landed a nice place, but it was a rental. That wasn't that different to what I was used to with my company though. I didn't mind that, but I didn't love that. I was literally in the middle of nowhere. I don't like to use that term lightly, by the way. It was deep in the mountains. Despite it being remote, for want of a better word, it was a big house, and it came at a good price. A big house, but an old house, and that was fine by me. It looked like it had plenty of character. I should say we every time my company transfers me, because I have to uproot my family and move them with me. It kinda sucks because my daughter made some good friends at school, and to tell her she's gotta leave really pulls on my heartstrings. So we had been living there for about a month, and things were going pretty okay. That was until my daughter found something in the garden. She found some weird-looking box. It didn't make much sense to me, as I'm the type of guy who looks over the place they're going to be living in from top to bottom when they first move in. I know I looked all over the house, and every inch of that garden the first day we got there. I know that there was no box in the garden. I mean, there are mundane objects that we see in day-to-day life that are pretty forgettable though, right? You know, a plant pot, a mailbox, or a book. We as humans aren't supposed to recall everything we see. But I'm telling you right now, if you saw that creepy little box that my daughter had in her hands as she came in from the garden, you'd recognize if you had seen it before. I mean, the thing looked totally unique. I am not one of those people who claim to sense the presence of the paranormal, but I have to say, that box gave me the creeps. It just looked really old, as if it was from a different time period. It was about 2 hands long and 2 hands wide. Sorry, I'm not great with measurements. It was a perfect oblong, and it had a metal clasp that kept it shut. Now this next part is crucial. If I had made the right choice, right then, things might have ended differently. I didn't like the box, so I chose to burn it. But look, hear me out. Like I said, I didn't see it when we did a sweep of the garden when we moved in. It wasn't ours either, so to me it was a piece of trash, and I didn't like the vibe it was giving off, so I tossed it in the campfire. I didn't know at the time what I was doing. I was just glad to be rid of the thing. A couple of days went by and I received some terrible news. One of my co-workers had a car accident. He was in a really bad crash. His car burst into flames. He suffered some horrendous burns. He had to be put into an induced coma. Then, only a few days later, a good friend of mine back home, perhaps even my best friend, had an accident too. He was having a bonfire at home and something terrible happened. His clothes caught fire and he was left with half of his face burned, as well as his right arm. I mean, if he wasn't such a good friend, I probably wouldn't kid about it, but he looked like Two-Face from the Batman series. When I heard the news, I went to visit him. I asked him about the incident, and he said something pretty strange. He told me that about 3 days before it happened, he started to have some real bad dreams. I dreamed that my whole body was engulfed in flames and I was on fire. Those are his words. I won't ever forget them. I have never ever been the type of person to believe in superstitions, but when he said that, something kind of clicked in my head, and I thought to myself, hang on, maybe. As soon as I got back to my new home, I started looking around the garden, and I went directly to my fire pit. And I found that creepy box. And let me tell you something, although the outside of the thing was covered in charred wood, the structural integrity of it wasn't in question. What I mean by that is, the thing was pretty much still intact. I don't know how on earth that could be possible, as I thought I had successfully incinerated it. I reached into the ashes at the bottom of the fire pit to fish it out, and I'm not scared to admit this. I felt a chill tremor through my body. It was like a fear I hadn't felt before, like some kind of ancient fear. I know I sound so dumb when I say that, but that's how I felt. I undid the clasp that held the box shut and I looked inside for the first time. There were 3 dolls inside. They were constructed entirely of straw, and they looked like the kind of dolls used in the Ushinokoku Mairi ritual. Hi, Jay here. Ushinokoku Mairi is one of the most famous and dreaded rituals in Japan. It takes place between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning. This time period is known as the Hour of the Ox. This is the period of the darkest night, when the border between the world of the living and the world of the dead is the weakest. During this hour, evil spirits are at their greatest power. In short, the ritual involves hammering nails through a straw doll effigy to a sacred tree, usually at a shrine. The implication here is to curse. Usually the effigy bears the name of the target and is either filled with their hair, blood, fingernails, or a photo. I go into this in more detail in my Shrines video, which I will link below. Back to the story. I was so shocked to see these weird straw dolls in that box. There was something weirder though. 2 of the dolls had been burned, to different degrees, but one of them had come out of the fire pit completely unscathed. I picked up one of the dolls, and I dropped it to the floor almost instantly. I had turned it over in my hands, and to my utter surprise and disgust, I had seen my friend's name written on its back. I looked at the charred doll, but I couldn't see a name on its back for obvious reasons. But I feel like I got the gist. Then I picked up the doll in the middle, and before I turned it over, I knew which name I would read there. My fears were confirmed when I turned the thing over to read my own name on its back. Why was I spared the fire? That was the first strange question that entered my brain. Everything was so weird. The next question that my brain forced me to try to answer was, who the fuck did this and why? My coworker and my childhood friend have no common connections bar me. They've never met. I hadn't lived in Yamaguchi long enough to make any enemies. I hadn't even really made friends with the neighbors. Who could hate me here? Maybe someone following me in the shadows and got to know the people in my life? Seems like a bit of a reach though. Where did that horrible box of dolls come from? Someone knew me. I couldn't live there after all that. I mean, could anyone? I went to a local temple, a Buddhist temple, and I asked them to cleanse me of the thing. Bless my friend and my coworker too, but they refused to touch the dolls. The head priest said to me, I wanted to offer a service, to commend these dolls to the life beyond this life, but there is something very bad at play here. I don't know how I can help you because to me, you 3 were not cursed by a person. There is a malevolent spirit that deeply hates you. And I'm sorry, I just can't help you. I left the temple with more questions than answers. I don't know what to do now. I really don't. I guess that's why I'm here. Anyone out there have any great ideas? I don't know what's happening. This happened when I was left home alone as a youngster one night. It was horrifying. I think the reason I was left home alone was probably due to my parents both working late one night simultaneously. My family home was opposite a national highway on one side, and on the other side it faced the sea. It's a very rural place, like literally in the middle of nowhere. That night I was watching something dumb on TV quite late. Whenever my parents were out late, they always told me to take myself to bed on time, but I never did. I just stayed up late. That night, like I say, I was watching some late-night variety show in the living room. My cat was with me, being lovely and fluffy as usual. Suddenly, I heard a knock at one of the windows of the living room. It came from the side of the house that faced the national highway. It sounded kind of deliberate, you know, kind of like this. It was kind of windy out that night, so I guessed that maybe a tree limb or something tapped the glass. I don't know, out in the countryside you tend to hear all kinds of things late at night, and I guess you grow to live with them. I just kept right on watching TV without worrying about it. A few moments or so passed and I hear something else. This time it sounded as if the knocking came from another window in the room next to the lounge. I started to feel a little spooked. The first few pangs of fear, you know, but I let it go. I just kept watching TV. I knew that no one but me was in the house or around the house. Then I heard another series of knocks. This time they came from the front door. At this point, young though I was, I couldn't help but notice a pattern. A few windows had been knocked. It wasn't as if I was hearing the knocking from one continuous location. Something was wrong. I sat frozen to the sofa, considering whether to turn the volume up or down. One part of me wanted so much to ignore the knocking sounds, but the other part of me screamed at me to listen, to turn off the TV and react. I turned down the volume, but not fully off. I didn't want to be plunged into silence. I wanted the safety of the voices on TV. The knocking continued. This time it sounded as if it came from the back door, and then the kitchen window. At that point, I realized that the knocks were sort of circling me, going around the house. These knocks were so light that each time I heard them, I doubted myself but couldn't convince myself. The knocks then reached the sea-facing window of the lounge, and I guessed, if there was any method to the madness, that the knocks would likely stop after one full round of the house. However, I found that I was quickly proven wrong. I heard much louder and much more deliberate sounding knocks at the lounge window facing the highway. After a minute maybe, the same knocking sound at the same volume came from the window next to the lounge. I thought to myself instantly, it's a lap. Someone's doing a lap around our house, and their knocks get louder once they return to the place they started. Yeah, at this point, I wasn't convinced it was the wind anymore. I decided to anticipate the next knock and head to the front door. Our front door has a frosted glass panel so you can see in or out clearly. The knock came clearly at the front door, but I couldn't see anyone there. I looked outside the downstairs bathroom window, but again I couldn't see anyone. I heard a knock coming from the room next to the kitchen, and I knew that the knocks were once again moving. I was getting so scared now, I rushed back into the lounge. In the lounge I saw that my cat was looking agitated. I sat there wide-eyed, listening to the sound of the knocks, slowly moving around the house. I was just frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I felt as if it was probably a bad idea to stay in the living room. I picked up my cat, and I planned to escape upstairs. There was one problem though. The stairs were in view of the front door, and one of the windows, so I needed to wait until the knocks were at the back door before I could run upstairs. As soon as I heard those knocks at the back door, I raced upstairs. I didn't even turn my bedroom light on. I just held my cat tightly to my chest and strained my ears to listen for any noises. The knocking came again. It had completed its second round of the house, and now was beginning its third. I decided to use the darkness of my bedroom as a vantage point. I looked out of the second floor window. My bedroom was directly above the lounge, so if someone was down there I should have been able to see them. But once again I couldn't. I heard knocking, but no one's there. I was on the verge of panic. The cat starts growling and hissing. I don't know if there was an extremely stealthy person out there, or if I was dealing with something paranormal. I had the gut feeling that it was human though. The knocking was really, really loud now. It was terrifying. I didn't know what I could do. The house phone was downstairs and I was way too freaked out to go back down there. Then something happened. Gradually the knocks grew quieter and softer until they were barely audible. The cat began to calm down a little too. When my cat lay on my bed and closed her eyes, I knew that she didn't feel threatened anymore. I felt as if everything was all right. I decided to go and get ready for bed. I had learned my lesson about staying up too late. I was just about to leave my room and go and brush my teeth when I heard something. The knocking was back, and it was louder than ever. It sounded as if every window in our house was being knocked at once, and the cat went mental. Full on arched her back, and her fur was standing on end. I had no idea what to do. I just crawled into bed and covered myself with my bedding like a coward. I was crying. I didn't know why someone was messing with our house like that. The banging was so loud, it felt like the walls were shaking. I was mumbling out loud something like, "Please leave us alone, I can't take it anymore." I don't know how long I was like that in bed, but before I knew it, the knocking sound had quietened down again, and the front door was opening. I was terrified. Whoever was out there had managed to get in. But then, just as quickly as fear had overwhelmed me, relief did. I heard the voices of my parents coming from the foot of the stairs. That kind of phenomena has never happened again at my family home. I have no clue if someone was messing with our home, to intimidate us, or maybe it was some of my school friends pranking me. They never owned up to it, if it was them though. Sometimes I wonder if it was something supernatural. I have heard rumors about those lost at sea, returning, and knocking on doors. Hi, Jay here. Actually, I cover that last point in more depth in another video. I will put a link to that one in the bio. It was in the Sea Story collection if you've